Hello and welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. Nathan Godwin is a South Australian landscape photographer with a passion for the ocean and coastal images. He loves a good adventure exploring the South Australian coastline or longer road trips interstate to capture the beauty that Australia has to offer. Over the last few years, Nathan started hosting regular Instameets around South Australia. These meets are open to all levels and he's always happy to help people capture the images they have in mind or have a chat as the light changes. We discuss his origins in macro photography, how that has shaped his unique vision for landscape photography and his favourite South Australian shooting locations, along with a lot more. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day Nathan, welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
Doing really good. Thanks, Grant. How are you going today?
Yeah, pretty good. It's been a fairly chill day today. Dog sitting for my daughter.
Yeah. That does sound like a pretty chill day. I wouldn't mind doing that myself.
You give him a feed and run him around a little bit and he sleeps for the rest of the day, which is pretty good, which means I can get on with things.
Yeah, sounds like a good deal.
So, enough about me and dog sitting. How did you get started in photography and in particular, why landscape photography?
My story is a little bit different in the sense that it didn't actually start with landscape photography. So everyone asks me how long it's been that I've been shooting and I never know the exact answer, but I think it's been about probably 12 or 13 years since I got my first camera.
Sure.
And I was actually drawn to macro photography.
Wow.
And photos of jumping spiders particularly. So there's a photographer in America called Thomas Shahan who takes like absolutely incredible macro photos. And I think on Facebook one day I was just like scrolling through Facebook and I saw this photo and I was like, wow, this is incredible. I was like, what on earth is this? And I was started scrolling through his stuff and I was like, this is amazing. And then I followed him on Instagram and I was like, wow, this is just, I want to do this. I was like, this is it's so intriguing that the detail that he captured for like these little spiders and dragonflies and all different sorts of little arthropods. And I was like, I've got to do this. So probably about a week after I first saw that, I went out and bought my first camera, bought a macro lens for it. And then the journey started probably weeks of just taking really average macro photos. And as time got on, started sort of trialing different things. And then just fell in love with landscape photography. Like it just switched. I mean, I still do a little bit of macro photography at the moment, but predominantly I just love getting out, watching a sunset or a sunrise or just capturing the night sky and just soaking up that moment in time that for me, I feel a lot of people probably don't pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And so then
there's not a lot of people out at
that
hour, you know. I know when I go to the beach, I might see, or if I'm lucky, half a dozen swimmers in a rock pool here in Sydney. Yeah, and that's in a metropolis of 5 and a bit million people.
Exactly, and Adelaide's obviously a lot smaller, but it's for me. I find it really intriguing because I'll go out and I'll see this amazing sunset and all these colours, and I'll look around, and the few people that are out, like sure, a few of them are pulling out their phones and taking photos, but a lot of them just keep walking.
Yeah.
Or you see people just driving, and then I think to myself, people are at home watching TV when you could be out enjoying this weather or enjoying the light. And so for me, landscape photography is all about capturing that beauty and then sharing it with the people that don't stop to appreciate it in the hopes that then they'll go out and appreciate it.
Yeah.
Which is really, really difficult at times because I think some of the tools that we have or some of the ways of sharing images people don't really see or appreciate at times.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of the learning macro, I'm interested in, because there's quite a bit of technical skill that you need to put together, to build up a really good macro image. How did you go about learning that? Is that just YouTube and trial and error, or were you doing something a little bit more formal?
No, everything. So all my photography is YouTube, reading, and then trial and error. So nothing is. I've done no formal training. I've just spent countless hours just out and about taking photos. I learned best by doing. So I'll watch a few videos to understand a few things, like maybe how to build like a softbox to be able to attach to my flash instead of going out and buying one. But the majority of it is literally just, all right, let's go out, let's take a photo, let's see what it looks like. All right, how can I perfect that? And then I'll come back and I'll go out again. And then building like a macro rig is also part of the fun, because you can get a macro lens, which is 1-to-1.
Yep.
I've played around with reversing lenses to get different magnification, and then also like extension tubes as well to then get greater magnification to be able to play around, and then just literally just trial and error and crawling around on the ground looking for little spiders and bugs and stuff, and then them scurrying away and just being frustrated that I found one and then it's disappeared.
Your subject wouldn't stand still.
No. Luckily, like jumping spiders are actually really curious creatures.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are scared of spiders, but they're actually, when they see some, not all, but they'll sort of be more curious about, okay, what are you doing? And why are you interested in me? And so they will sort of pose for photos. Yeah. And just, I don't know, they just got these really unique personalities and like quirks and facial expressions. And I probably sound like crazy to be talking about spiders like this. I'm smiling thinking about them, because I think back to photos that I've taken, and I'm like, I just remember that spider just being like, I see you taking photos of me. I'm putting on a little bit of a show for you.
They might be looking at themselves as a reflection in the lens, maybe.
Probably that too. And like the beauty about jumping spiders, and predominantly the ones that I love are the peacock jumping spiders.
Yeah.
And which are the ones that are known for like putting up their backs and then dancing side to side for the female mate.
Yeah.
And they're probably the spider that I've searched for the longest. And it took me 3.5 years to finally find one in Adelaide.
Wow.
They're just so like, there's a lot of there's spiders everywhere. There's spiders in your house now. They're everywhere. But these like peacock jumping spiders in Adelaide are super rare. And they're only in small little pockets of the state. And I remember the first day I finally found one, I was like shaking. I was like literally like, oh my God. My friend's like, what's going on? I'm like, you don't understand what this is. And he was like, it's just a spider, man. He's like, just let it go. I'm like, no, I want to take photos of this thing. So a bit of a spider geek. Before I came on, I was actually wearing one of my pajama tops, which is, it's actually got a jumping spider on the front of it, and it's a shirt that Thomas Shahan had actually designed.
Nice.
And so I've got it, but it's falling apart slightly because I've had it for probably 10 or 12 years now.
Wow.
But I was like, I can't wear that on this.
It's fair enough. I don't really use the video very much. I'm thinking about whether or not I start releasing some of these as videos on YouTube. Or not. At the moment, I just do the audio on YouTube, but you never know. We might we might see your smiling face.
Maybe.
So I guess taking those lessons from macro, how did you translate some of that learning into what you're doing with your landscape work?
Probably just the trial and error, because you go out. And macro is probably, it's really complex in terms of the lighting, the angles, the lenses, even the focusing is super, like, because you're working with such shallow depths of fields, and these spiders can be a few millimeters. So taking probably some of those learning skills from the macro of just the struggles with, I guess it's different in the sense that the environment, you're dealing with a much larger field, but just the trial and error of, okay, well, where do I focus? Where do I want my subject to be in the image, or the focal point of the image to be, and just playing around. So moving around, trying different compositions, and then I think just trial and error, like really is just shooting, seeing if it looked good, if it felt right as well, is a big thing for me.
Cool. So what is it that you think you're chasing most in your photography? What is it that you're thirsty for?
That's an interesting question. For me, I always like to think that I'm chasing the light. The light is what I love the most. So when you're watching a sunset and the light is continuously changing as the sun's setting or the sun's rising, and you see just different parts of a scene, whether it's, like the jetty as the sun is setting, and you see the light just changing across and lighting up the textures of the wood.
Yeah.
That's what I'm always chasing. Like just those intricate little moments where the light is just perfect.
Yeah.
And everything just flows together. And, if it's a sunset that's got no clouds, there's going to be a bit of a glow. And so then that glow will transfer onto, again, I guess to use, if it's a jetty, you're going to see that along the side of the jetty, or if, depending on where it is, it's just going to light up certain parts of the scene. And I'd say that's what I'm chasing is that light and those fleeting, because it's only momentarily there, and then it stops and it's gone until the next day potentially. And some of my favorite images, if I think back to, they are literally very brief moments where the light, if it peeked through a cloud and it was just perfect for a second, and I was there just to be able to take a picture, would probably be what I'm chasing the most.
Yeah, fantastic. Do you have goals in your photography? And if so, what are they? In terms of goals, I have a few, and they're predominantly just mainly about just capturing certain locations. Mm-hmm. So I have different areas, like New Zealand is top of my list, and I'm heading there in just over a month's time. Nice. And so my goals are basically just to capture images in places that I've seen online, mm-hmm. and capture my own images that have a feeling of me in them. Yep.
So that would probably be one of my main goals, is getting out and traveling more. I'm also very driven by by personal growth and just improving in what I'm doing. So I've for years have always looked at my images and been like, this is a good image, but what could be done better? And so I'm continuously working on, how do I take the image better in the first place? How do I process the image better, sure, to just give more emotion in it? Mm-hmm. And then if I think about like probably a bit more of maybe a big, massive dream or goal of mine, I would love to see my images one day potentially in like a National Geographic magazine.
Sure.
Which is a pretty out there goal, because I think with National Geographic and the type of photos that they do share, they're probably not in line with what I currently capture and share.
Yeah.
But that would be like, that's just like, I remember as a kid growing up and mum every month buying the National Geographic magazine and just being fascinated by the images that are in there, whether it's the wildlife or the landscapes, and just being like, this is amazing. This is incredible. And so now that I've got the tools to be able to capture images, I'm like, that would be an amazing goal to have for me.
Yeah, cool. In terms of setting some of those goals, do you establish projects to achieve them, or are you more spontaneous about, okay, well, this will help me and I'll just add that to the shopping cart, I guess, along the way,
Yeah. So I think in terms of like setting things in motion to try and reach those goals, I'm probably very spontaneous in the sense that I would just go and do. I don't necessarily always plan my shoots, whereas I know some photographers will actually go, okay, I'm going to be at this spot at this time to get a certain photo. If I think about like trying to get photos in National Geographic and stuff like that, mm-hmm. in terms of like the traveling and the capturing images of the places that I want to go to, I have like soft plans in place to travel to different places. Obviously, New Zealand, that's booked and that's ready to go. And then in terms of the growth, in terms of the images that I want to capture, it's very spontaneous. It's just, it was actually something that I just do like I'm always thinking about.
Yeah, right.
In that sense, but it's spontaneous in terms of like when I do actually go and do something. I'm shooting most nights, and I'm doing something photography related nearly every day. But I don't have like set like 30-day, 60-day, 90-day goals.
Yeah, right.
or like small things to try and hit those markers.
Yep. Okay.
But I probably should. It's probably something that would be handy to have to be able to track that progress.
Yeah, so I guess some people get into the planning side of it a lot more, and that becomes integral to, I guess, not necessarily building their career, but sort of building the elements in their portfolio or building out skill sets that they might want to move into, or even trying different genres. You know, they say, all right, well, how do I apply this to what I've learned here to another genre of photography?
Yeah, which is like something that, if I think for myself, I realize this, you'll chop this out potentially anyway, but I've realized I just keep saying I think. No, I just got myself like tossed. Anyway, back on track. So, the skills that I've learned from landscape, I find that I push myself by trying different genres as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I've recently shot some maternity photos, which are completely different.
Yeah.
But it's giving me those extra skills to learn like different styles of shooting, to build on that skill set, which, as I get better with different things, I can start incorporating, maybe if it's models or people, into my landscape photos to give them that extra layer.
Yeah. And I think those compositional lessons, I don't want to call them rules because, okay, you got rule of thirds and various other rules in inverted commas. But I think of them more as lessons, because you learn as you form up your compositions. You learn what to include, what to exclude, whether or not a tighter crop or a wider shot is going to be right for that particular scene. And I guess applying that into portrait photography, you've already got that sense of what the landscape or what a scene might look like as a backdrop, and then applying that into portrait photography helps you place your people in the scene in an attractive way, or in a way that's actually going to make people want to look at it.
Yeah, I really like what you said there about it being a lesson and not necessarily a rule, because I find that a lot of people that are coming up in the photography scene, whether they've just picked up a camera or they've been around for a few months, they get really fixated on that it's a rule. I've got to do this. This is what
it's got to be rule of thirds, or it's got to be whatever,
And it doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
It can be whatever it is that you want it to be. They're there to help guide you, and the basics will assist. But you can create whatever it is that you want that aligns with what you want to capture, and not necessarily following these set rules in terms of, like, I guess the rule of thirds is probably the biggest one that a lot of people do focus on a lot.
Yeah, well, I think it's about making that creative choice around what's right for the scene. And I mean, to be honest, one of my favourite shots that I've taken personally is one where just throw the rule of thirds completely out. That said, there are some elements of using thirds in there, but if it's not traditional, the horizon is really up near the top of the frame. And the rest of the scene sort of fills out. But if you look at how things are positioned right to left and so forth, the negative space versus the bits that's filled with subject matter. And, yes, I've kind of used rule of thirds, but maybe not in a non-traditional way.
Yeah, but it's because
it's learning that skill to be able to say, okay, well, I don't have to put the horizon on the upper or the lower third line. It could be right up near the top or right near the bottom of the frame, depending on what it is that I'm shooting and how I'm actually bringing the whole thing together.
Exactly, and somebody that might be fixated on the rule would be like, no, it's got to be like this. It's got to be like this, and they'll come away with a completely different image.
Correct.
That could be still a really great image.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But it may not have the same feel that your images has, and they might look at that and go, well, that's not how I've been taught or what the rule says to do, but they'll go, that photo has this certain feeling to it that changes, maybe evokes an emotion in them. And they'll be like, oh, I should have tried that.
Yeah.
And that's where it's a lesson. You learn as you go.
Definitely.
See, because I know for me, probably the rule that I follow, not follow, the lesson I follow the most is like leading lines. So whether it's, the jetty, if it's a path, I hate to say it, but a set of stairs,
Yep.
those leading lines for me are something that I think I'm subconsciously drawn to, because when I look back, even just thinking about some of my images now, my predominantly landscape-based images, there is some form of leading line through an image, whether it's the curve of the beach or it's the stairs or it's a jetty or something. There's always that probably focus, where I'm probably less focused on like rule of thirds, for instance.
Yeah. I think, what you're saying about the leading lines, it's something which is very, very common in landscape photography. Some might call it cliched, but I don't think cliched images are necessarily bad either.
Yeah.
Because again, as you said, it's really about the emotion that is expressed in it and how you react to that. And it might be, I don't want to see any more of those stairs, or I don't want to see any more of that jetty, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Because I've seen it so many times. I mean, there's that bridge in Sweden, between Sweden and Denmark there, that I can't imagine, or the Opera House, or the Sydney Harbour Bridge that's just been shot to death.
Yeah.
But there's still certain images that you look at and you go, yeah, that's a really good one, and it really anchors an emotion to it. And you look at it and go, even though compositionally it's probably not very much different to a lot of others, but there's elements in it that make it slightly different enough that you stop, look at it, and go, oh, I'm really hooked to that image, or to that composition.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, I saw an image recently of the Sydney Opera House, and you see so many of them, especially with when Vivid's on. After the Queen's passing, there was Opera House. I was just scrolling through Facebook and Instagram, and I was just like, Opera House, Opera House, Opera House, Opera House. But then there was one the other day that just literally stopped me dead. I was just like, wow. And it was not compositionally, it was not unique in any way, but there was just something about the image. I was just like, this is just incredible. Right. And for South Australian based photographers, Port Wollonga, the Port Noarlunga South Stairs are probably two of those images. Like, they're probably South Australia's version of those places, in the sense that they're always seen. And people always say to me, they're like, why do you keep going back to the stairs? Why do you keep going back to Port Wollonga? And I'm like, even though compositionally the photos are relatively similar at times, there's a different feeling and emotion. And
the conditions are different, and the various other things that you may do to the image. It might even just be a change in white balance, or the temperature, of that white balance. You might just adjust up or down slightly, and it changes the feel entirely.
100%. And one of my images that went viral years and years ago that I absolutely hate it. I could just hate it. And I've edited that photo since, and it has this totally different feel to it. And I think that's also the other thing that's beautiful about digital photography, is that we can go back and change
you're not
the exact
restricted to what you got in the negative, then delivering pretty much the same result. Though that said, even in film in darkroom, if you've got a negative, you can still adjust. Again, depending on if it's colour or black and white, but even there, you can adjust the white balance, you can adjust tone, you can adjust contrast, you can actually make that negative into something completely different to another processing technique that you put to it. And but as you say, it's far easier in digital to get that how you want it.
100%. Which, obviously it's just it's so simple, because we can just literally just sit there and go, this photo could be processed hundreds and hundreds of different times and add different elements into it, and as you said, just tweak the tiniest of little things, and it will change the whole feeling of the image.
I guess that leads us on to your approach to photography as it relates to experience versus art. you've obviously, attached that emotional response, I guess, and you're very aware of that. Does that mean that what you're trying to do is artistic with the image, or are you still trying to remain true to what you've seen in the, and make it more of I don't want to say documentary per se, because it's not just here's the shot, here's exactly what it looked like, but the feeling that was there when you were standing maybe at the top of the stairs or the bottom of the stairs or wherever you were.
Yeah. So for me, I've found over the years that that's changed. So early on, I was very much about these dreamy, long exposure, ethereal feeling type images that were probably way over the top in terms of saturation and vibrancy. And they weren't, we definitely all go through that. And they weren't they were real in the sense, obviously, that the light was there and the color to some degree was there. Yep. But I've boosted it and tweaked a lot of it to change it far outside of what it actually was. And so I'd probably say back then I was probably a bit more of an artist in the sense of I was creating digital art.
Yep.
As this year has gone along, I feel I've sort of moved more to a lot more natural in terms of removing, even though I still capture quite a bit of pastel type images, they're still true to what they are. Yep. And in some of my images, I'll remove the saturation just so that they don't feel like I have just cracked the saturation, or that they're not too vibrant, they're not too punchy, and I'll pull back in certain areas to make it how I felt at the time. Whereas 2-3 years ago, it was the complete opposite. It was like, let's try and make this image just look like out of this world, in a sense that it's not real. But people would comment and be like, oh wow, that's amazing, like I wish I was there. And it's like, well, I look back now and I go, well, it wasn't actually like that.
Yeah, it wasn't quite the same. Yeah.
No, and there's certain elements to my images now where probably I'm borderline between pushing it back to how I used to be. But a lot of my images now, I feel, are definitely more true to how the scene is in terms of the light and the colors. And I'm not playing so much in like the shadows and the split toning and adding extra colors into the shadows, which is what I used to do a lot. So I add a lot of like pinks into the shadows.
Yep.
Into the highlights, and then blues into the shadows, and just tweak it too much. Whereas now I'm doing less of that, but then probably making the glow of the sun just that little bit more now. It's probably one of the things I do a lot.
In terms of making a conscious decision around that, is that something that you've just changed over time, or is it something that you sort of said, okay, well, I guess what drove that decision to change the style slightly?
I think just as I've grown as an artist or as a photographer, I've gone through sort of, as you mentioned, like we all go through that phase where we do super saturated, super vibrant images, and I could easily have stuck to that and just kept doing that, just keep punching that up. Then as I've like grown and I've been shooting more and more, I've just been more drawn to those a bit more natural images. And so it's slowly evolved as time's gone on, and it will continue to evolve. And I don't know where I'll be in 6 months' time. I may dive back the other way, or I may move more into maybe adding extra elements into images, like in terms of like maybe just photoshopping things in. I don't think I will.
Yep.
I have toyed with it in the past in terms of moving things around in a scene or making the moon bigger than what it actually is. But then I don't feel like that's photography. And so I think of myself as a photographer first. Yeah. It's like that's definitely more art. And even though that it's some level of photography, it's not what I want to portray. I want to portray what the scene is, what the emotion is that I felt when I was there, and hopefully invoke that same emotion in somebody that's looking at that image.
Yeah, cool. I mean, for me, there's no right or wrong here, because, a composite image, if you've gone out, as long as you're not, cutting and pasting other people's work into your images, which as long as you got their permission, that's great if that's what you do. But I guess in terms of that whole genre of digital art as opposed to straight photography, I guess it's really a stylistic choice that people can make. And I certainly, from my perspective, I do a bit of both, and quite happy doing a bit of both. Quite like, nailing a documentary style image that just shows this is what happened, or this is what it looked like, and just got the color and contrast exactly right and so forth. But also quite happy to sit there and make a nice dreamy shot, as you say, maybe enlarge the moon a little or whatever. The thing is, as long as you're honest about it, and as long as you're telling people that's what you're doing, I don't think there's a problem with it.
No, and I think that is probably the big thing, is because there are photographers that are out there that will create these images, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so people go, oh, wow, that's amazing. I wish I could have gotten that. But really, there is that composite. And you're right. Like, I think you do need to tell people that, hey, this is actually a composite. Like, I've done this. You don't have to say necessarily, like, this is exactly what I've done and how I've done it, but just be like, this is a composite. This, I didn't add this element, and I think that's a very important thing, because then it's just setting the right expectation, but just showing people that, like, it's okay to do that as well. Because I feel at times some people are like, no, you can't do this composite stuff. You've got to.
Well, it's like the compositional rules. There are none really. You can pretty much do what you like. That's the nice thing about it.
Exactly. I was talking to someone before this, and when they are, it's a bit cloudy for the moon tonight, and so they're hoping to still get a shot, and then they'll just composite it into another photo. But they've said, like, this is my plan, and then I'll share it and explain this is what it is because of the conditions. Weren't right, and I think that's definitely the right way about going about it. And there's no, I don't feel it's wrong to do composites. No. I think similar to yourself, I'm probably the same. Whereas sometimes I'll do it. If I think back to an image, I think I shared it, but then I deleted it because I wasn't 100% happy with it. But it was, the elements were all from the one night.
Mm-hmm.
And I shot like a skyline of, like, the Gold Coast skyline.
Yep.
But where the skyline was no clouds.
Yeah.
And so I took pan to the right, and the colors and the clouds looked amazing. And so I took a few photos, and then in Photoshop I just layered them together, and you couldn't tell.
Yeah.
And but, like, I didn't end up liking it in the end, so I removed it. Because I think I went through that phase where I was just like, oh, I don't know if I should be sharing composites. So maybe I should just share what the scene was like on the night. So I removed it, but probably should go back and revisit it and play around with it a bit and then reshare it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's one of the reasons why I've taken to, I guess, describing not, yes, the settings are there, and that's largely the settings. And I'll say, this, if I've done an exposure blend, which I do a lot of, because a lot of what I do is high contrast environments, sunrise, sunset, waterfalls. Sometimes, you get that high contrast, and it's really difficult to manage, that high dynamic range of very dark shadows and very bright highlights without doing some kind of exposure blending.
Yeah,
it's not impossible. You get the right camera, you can do it, But I also enjoy the processing side of things. So, that to me is a big part of what I do. And so I'm very open about, yes, this isn't one single image, and you couldn't possibly get that necessarily. Well, you could if you had the right filters, and you could, make sure that you had a nice flat horizon, which I don't always have, and so forth. But it's really around being honest around what I'm doing. So if I put up a composite image, I'm saying this is a composite.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is all one shot, and hallelujah, I'm an amazing photographer. I'm not.
Yeah, but see, when I think about what you've just spoken about, I think about that image that you shared was it yesterday with the light through the trees?
Yes, that was a single image.
Yeah, okay, like that. I've just when you were talking, I was like, maybe that was a blending. But that
Yeah,
image is
no,
what I think.
that one so I took a range of shots in that one that I shared there at Girracool, and I mean the conditions were literally like that. There was these beautiful sunbeams come down between the trees, lighting up, and if you have a look at it, it was actually if you had a look at the raw file, it's probably overexposed by about a stop and a half. Um, and so I brought it down in Adobe Camera Raw by about a stop and a half to try and manage the highlights. There's still a couple of blown highlights in small patches, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But everything else, all I did then was I selectively played with the white balance on the light rays as opposed to the streams of the waterfall. So
Wow.
there was more yellow tone in those light streams and more white tone, or blue tone, I guess, in the waterfall stream. And literally, that was the developing or the processing trick that I used was just selective editing. So you use a mask to mask out. That's what I want to affect. And I just tweaked the white balance for each of those two elements separately. But everything else was pretty much as shot. And then it was just around getting contrast and everything right.
Yeah, well, that's incredible. Like just to think of like that, I've never thought about actually doing that, playing around with those different values separately.
Yeah,
image.
This comes from watching copious amounts of YouTube, and I keep telling a lot of people that F64 Academy, Blake Rudis, his understanding of how Photoshop works is, I think, almost second to none, and his way of describing how to manage color in particular and selectively manage color, he's got some fantastic tutorials on how to do some of those things. And it's really that and the ability to, I guess now in Adobe Camera Raw, if I'd done that in Photoshop, I don't use Lightroom personally.
Yeah.
I actually find the what do you call it? The database that it builds the galleries and everything annoying. I find it easier to find stuff in the file system just using Windows Explorer personally.
Yeah.
But anyway, I use the ability to use masks in Adobe Camera Raw / Lightroom is really the thing that triggered that thinking process and the I guess the thought behind getting around to actually editing an image that way. It's not a technique I've used a lot recently in terms of the white balance separation. I've done quite a lot of my images. I do selective contrast adjustments. So you'll select mid-tones, highlights, and shadows, and then selectively using a curves adjustment layer, tweak each of the contrast elements in those three differently. So you're separating out how the contrast actually works across the image. So that's a technique I've used quite a bit. And the reason I do that is because it just gives you really fine-tuned control over every part of your image and how the contrast actually works within that image.
Which is something that you don't really get in Lightroom. We don't get in Lightroom. You don't get that fine level of control.
Unless you're using luminosity masks, it's almost you can do it with masking now to a point.
Yeah.
So I think the most recent update in Lightroom, there was the ability to use a curves adjustment with a mask.
Oh, okay.
So if you take a look at it, I don't know if you've got the latest Lightroom, but if you take a look at the latest Lightroom and get into masks, you'll now see that there's the little contrast adjustment, which means that you can either brush or you can select through luminosity or color or whatever, select your mask. As long as you know how to select your mask well, you can actually affect individual parts of your image now, which is something I've been doing for years now in Photoshop, because Photoshop gives you that with luminosity mask, the ability to actually mask based on the luminosity of each of the pixels, which means you can make very fine-tuned adjustments to it all. Anyway, enough of the technology.
No, that's like, see, that stuff interests me. I know, like, probably people listening are probably like, oh, geez, these guys, they're talking about things we can't see. They've spoken about an image that we can't actually see.
I'm here waving my arms around.
Yeah. I'll just hold up little signs. But like, it's really interesting to talk about that sort of stuff, because it's something that, when it comes to the post-processing, we all probably spend different amounts of time like processing an image. Some people might just pop an image straight into Lightroom and whack a preset on it and then go, boom, see you later, I'm off. Yeah. And some people will use Photoshop and spend a lot of time playing it with little parts of an image to perfect an image. And I find that really interesting, because it's, you and I could go to the same scene and take the same image,
and then process it completely differently. I can give you one of my raw files, and it will, or a group, a bracketed group that I would use for an exposure blend, and you would come up with a completely different look to what I did.
and use different tools and different ways of doing it. But I'm going to have to play around with that, with those new tools in Lightroom, because I don't generally play around.
The masking tool in Lightroom just opens up massive possibilities that weren't there, 12 months ago. For me, as I say, everything in Lightroom is there in Adobe Camera Raw. So because I don't want the baggage that comes with the database that Lightroom sets up and the gallery, to be honest, the gallery does my head in.
Yeah.
For two reasons. One, it's actually creating a database which takes up disk space, and when you load it into memory as well, you can play around with caching and everything, and you can optimize it, but it's still taking up system processing resources that I prefer to use, because I use Photoshop, and Photoshop's a hungry beast as it is. And I know Lightroom can be a hungry beast as it is, But I've just found working my process, doing away with the database, doing away with Lightroom, working within Adobe Camera Raw, which basically has almost all of the developing, that developer tab, or the develop tab in Lightroom, is exactly what Adobe Camera Raw provides. And so as long as you've got the raw image, you can pretty much do whatever you like to it. And to a point, you can do a bit with the JPEG image.
Yeah, because when I first started with photography, it was Photoshop that I used. And so I was really probably the same sort of thing, like the Adobe Camera Raw, and then like take it into Photoshop and play around with different layers and mask to some degree.
I'm still doing that.
Yeah. And then I think maybe, I don't want to say laziness, but I found Lightroom then easier. I played around with Lightroom. I was like, this is a lot easier, like little sliders. But for me, it just, like, I personally like the file structure of Lightroom.
I'm not saying it's just a personal thing. I don't like what it does to the computer in terms of slowing it down and taking up disk space. And so I ditched it a few years ago. It's probably improved out of sight from where it was, but it's just something that I don't like and don't want.
The last week I've had continuous issues with my catalogs being corrupted. So I've been like deleting catalogs, backing up, like using backups, and then reinstalling thousands of photos that I've taken, because it just it doesn't work. And then earlier in the year, I lost every single photo that I took in February because my catalog crashed, and I don't know what happened. And then everything was gone. And because I was traveling across Queensland, New South Wales with a mate, my backup hard drive is here, and I was like, I've literally just lost everything I took in February. So
The one thing I do miss out on, which I would like, but I've kind of got because I work non-destructively in Photoshop anyway, so I create quite a few layers. But the one thing that I would like is all of the stuff that you do in Lightroom. You can, and again, this is another thing that adds weight to the database and everything because it stores this with your image file, is all of the edits that you've made, all of the changes that you've made. So all of the snapshots that you've held on to and selected, but every edit you've made is actually reversible in Lightroom. And that's great. I love that fact, but you can actually do the same sort of thing in Photoshop. It just takes a little bit more faffing about and,
yeah,
you know, but anyway. I guess talking less about the technology. Well, actually, why don't we talk a little bit about that? Because you raised something that I ask quite a bit on the show, is the relationship between where you shoot, what you shoot, how you shoot, and how you process, and which one is the biggest driver for you? Is it do you shoot a certain way, and do you shoot certain subjects because they're close, handy, and you process a certain way, or do you shoot certain subjects because you love them, and then that drives how you process and how you shoot them?
yeah. So I'm driven by location.
Mm.
100%. It's everything is the location, and it's not because they're close. So for me, I shoot a lot south of Adelaide CBD,
Yep.
and it's actually, depending on traffic, an hour to an hour and a half drive every time for me, depending on the area.
Yep.
And but it's just the areas that I go to, or the areas that are south, are just so photogenic, and that's what drives me to shoot those locations. And then in terms of the post processing side, that's changed again. So for me, I used to shoot a lot of like long exposures. Everything was, let's chuck a 10 stop ND filter in front of it and smooth out the motion. Let's capture some like the clouds dragging through an image.
Yep.
And I was driven by that because it created this real ethereal feel with the cloudy milkiness of the water, because that's like I found that people that I worked with or people that were commenting on my stuff were like, wow, this is amazing. It looks like it's a cloud scene, like with the water, like it's this misty fog. Like, well, that's just amazing. Like I've never seen that.
Yeah.
Unless
Because
I've
you
seen
can't see it with the human eye. Yeah.
yeah. So and then like the clouds, it's like a painting. And now like the majority of my stuff now is less with filters, and I'm capturing, whether it's, I still capture a little bit of motion if there's water in my scene, but generally I prefer the look of like half a second exposure.
Yeah.
Just that little bit of a drag of a wave, or the flow of the water as it goes out. So everything for me is driven by the locations, and then I shoot depending on the conditions that are there.
Yeah. Right.
So if it's a bit more of an overcast day and then sunset's going to be a bit more miserable, then I'll generally aim for those longer exposures, because I feel that you capture a bit of the mood of the scene if it's a bit darker. If there's a lot of bright light and the sun's like blaring, then I'll generally aim for like shorter exposures and try and frame my scene in a way that the sun is sort of just out of the frame, and then so that glow sort of comes into the scene. And then I'll make that pop a little bit more when it comes to the post processing, whether it's being using like a radial filter with a really soft like edge to it and just really blow it out, and then just tweak the exposure just the tiniest little bit.
Sure.
And add a bit of more orange to it. And I just find that for me, I just love that kind of feeling of an image.
Yeah, nice.
How about yourself? I'm curious to know, like, is it similar for yourself in terms of more...
Sort of, yes. I guess I shoot as I said, as I described before, I shoot the way that I do largely because I'm well aware of the limitations that I have on the gear. It's got reasonable dynamic range in camera, but it's still not as good as a human eye. And therefore, to get something that looks a bit like what you can see with the human eye, that's it. And I'm kind of excluding the very long exposure stuff that I might do at, you know, half an hour before, or an hour sometimes before sunrise, that nautical twilight, where you've literally got to have the shutter open for 7 minutes, excluding those because they're out there sort of shots. A, not many people do them, and B, they have their own look and feel, and they're a bit of a lottery when you make them as well, because you're not guaranteed to get quite the effect that you expected. But in terms of if I was, you know, going to the beach and doing a sunrise shoot, that kind of dictates to me that I've got to do some kind of bracketing and therefore some kind of exposure blending, because if I don't, to me, yes, I could buy filters, and this is one of the other things. Part of it's an economic reason. I don't see personally a lot of value in buying grad filters, whether they're hard or soft grad, and I don't own any, and I probably don't ever see myself buying any, simply because I can do what I want to do without those filters, and I can get a scene that looks, because I'm taking an exposure that's exposed for the brightest highlights and exposures that are for the darkest shadows, and a few in between, depending on how, you know, how many stops that looks like, you know, whether it's a 4 or a 5 stop change, you know, I'll do somewhere between 3 and 5 exposures. In some cases, I'll find, okay, because I haven't quite calculated it right, I only need to use 2.
Yeah.
But, you know, that sort of high dynamic range shot kind of dictates, because I don't own any grad filters and probably never will. It dictates that I've got a bracket, and therefore that dictates kind of how I shoot. Yeah. If I go waterfall hunting, that's slightly different, but again, you can still get some, you know, with the caves that get in behind the waterfall and the bright white of the water falling itself, you again can get into some high dynamic range situations. But when it's a dull day and you've got even light and everything, then I don't shoot that way. So, you know, again, as you said, it depends on the conditions. It depends on what it is that you're taking a shot of, and, you know, sometimes how I feel at the time. You know, could I be bothered messing around with it? That said, you know, that I go into it fully understanding, if I'm going to do a 5-shot bracket, and, you know, the attendant processing that comes behind that, the post-processing takes a bit of time, but it's something that I enjoy doing equally as much as I enjoy shooting.
Yeah.
You know, I know a lot of people, you know, they're loath to spend 10 minutes on their processing. But I kind of look at that a bit like, well, the time that you spend in the dark room back in the day when you were doing film is the time where you're actually bringing the image, you know, into the world and into a form of, I guess, finishing that image so that it's ready for public consumption, or, you know, personal consumption if you don't show your images to anyone. So for me, it's really about that. They're two sides of the same coin, and the shooting and the processing go hand in hand. Sometimes, as I say, though, you know, I'll surprise myself, and I'll find something and I'll take another look at it, like I did with the one that I posted the other day with the waterfalls that we were talking about just before, and be able to go, okay, well, when I first looked at that image, I thought, yeah, it's overexposed. I won't bother too much with it, and I moved on to other frames in the shoot because I thought they gave me better value for time, at the time. But when I've got the time, I'll go back into the archive and I'll take a second look and go, okay, well, let's reconsider this one. Let's see what I can do with it. Chuck it in, play with it. Can I get something that actually looks any good? And sometimes you get one that does.
Yeah. I think there's coming back with fresh eyes.
Oh, absolutely.
Is also so important because you can come back after a shoot, look at a few images and go, yeah, I'm not feeling this stuff. But then a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, you come back and you go, oh, hold on, there's actually something here.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Spend that time and then turn that into something that you go, wow, how did I not see this originally? Potentially.
Yeah, and the number of things I kind of look at them as saying, all right, well, there's primary images. I've nailed the composition. I've nailed what I want to do with it, and I've been able to process it and come out with something that I think is a really good shot. And I have the secondaries, which might sit in my archive for years before I touch them.
Yeah.
And some of those secondary ones are actually some of my favourites now because you go back to them, as you say, with fresh eyes, and you go, wow, this, I don't know why I didn't look at this one sooner.
Yeah. But when there's so many photos, depending on how often you go out, you're talking about hundreds or thousands of photos.
Yeah. So particularly when you're doing exposure blending, because I'm typically taking I will set up and I will do 5 images, say at f8. Then I might flick up to f11 or f13 or f14 and flick another 5 of the same composition. And then the light will change, and then I'll change settings again without moving, and flick off another 5. So I could be getting 20 or 30 images of the same composition within a fairly short period of time, within 3 or 4 minutes of setting up that composition. So for me, it's about making sure that there's a path that you can get what you want, and yourself. It can be, okay, well, I want a bit of streaky cloud in this set, so I've got to do longer exposures, or I don't want that, and therefore I'm going to do shorter exposures. And it's that trial and error and experimentation that means you do take a lot more shots than it may end up using.
And I think similar to like yourself, I will do, but I don't bracket as much anymore. When I first started, I used to bracket a lot, and I'd probably do 3 or 5, sometimes 7, which I found was just overkill.
Yeah, seven's overkill. I've never found a need to go that high.
No, I did it for a while because I think I watched a video that said, "Oh, do 7, you get way more." No, it's too much time. And now I don't. I think since I got the D850 when I first moved to that, the dynamic range of that camera was just so much that I was shooting bracketing to start off with, and I was like, I don't need this.
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah, and then when I moved to the Z line of cameras, it's the same thing. The dynamic range within those was just so much. So I was like, well, I don't need this. But that being said, I still shoot multiple frames because I might start shooting shorter exposures. So I'm capturing the texture of a wave or the texture of the water. And then slowly I might pop a filter on, or I might tweak some settings and just drag that shutter a little bit. And then I'll go, okay, let's go full line exposure. So I'll come away with like the same composition for the most part, but I'll have 5 different images because there's something different. Or the one that always comes to mind is those stairs. And I'll have, if someone's come walking up the stairs as they've come back from the swim, then I get the wet footprints in the stairs. So then I'll play around with that until the feet slowly dry away. Yeah. So it's really interesting that it's still the same thing.
And I find particularly with waves, when you're doing those, somewhere between a quarter and a half a second, the textures that you get are very different. But you can also not always predict, as the tide rises or falls, you can't always predict how that's going to play over the rocks that you or on the sand, that you're shooting, and therefore, you're not always going to get consistent results because each wave is going to be different. Not
100%.
Not every wave flows in exactly the same way, and you might find two or three in a set that might flow in a similar way, but then you might find the water fills up because you're getting to the last wave in the set, because they come in sort of sets of 5 to 7, and so that last couple of waves is going to flow completely different to the first one, where the waves or the set before it had time to drag out and there was less water in that sort of foreground.
100%. And I think for me, with especially with the water, it's now that the weather's getting warmer, I'll start jumping back into the water with my water housing, and I've been addicted to capturing the light on top of the water, and every image is different. And even though the water is just for the most part, if it's a calm day, it's like this, but the way that the light dances across the water as you're taking images, I'll come away with, if I'm trigger happy, I'll come away with a couple of hundred images. And I'll be skimming through them in Lightroom, and I'll just be like, wow, look at the way the light bounced off the water there, and then it's like this, or then there might be little bit of water drops on the water housing, and so then you get like a bit of like bokeh from that, and it's like, wow, it's incredible. It's just so different, even though it's the same. And then I'll play around with even dragging the shutter a bit, so I'm a bit slower, and then it's different again in terms of the texture of the water.
Yeah. What's the most memorable experience you've had out shooting?
I have to go for the first thing that came to my mind, and that would be, and it's not a landscape photo, but it's diving with turtles earlier this year. That's been something that's on like a bucket list shot for me, to go doing that. And I just remember like jumping into the water, diving around, and then just all of a sudden in front of me was just this big massive turtle, and I was just I was squealing through the snorkel. And when I came up, because my mate was still on the boat, I was like, Jake, you got to get in here. And he like jumped in, and by the time he got there, the turtle sort of swam off, and we ended up finding it again. But afterwards, he's like, they were worried you were drowning. Like, what do you mean? And he goes, because you were squealing through the snorkel, and they thought maybe something had happened, or something had gotten you, or you'd cramped or something. And they were actually thinking about coming to rescue you. And he's like, I told them that you were just like a kid in a candy store that had seen a turtle. And so that probably, like, if I think about most memorable moments, that would probably be the one that comes to mind, which it's not a landscape.
Oh, it's a great memory though.
Yeah. And one of my favorite photos I've taken is it's one of those photos from that series with the turtle and just the blue of the water. And
yeah.
I'm hoping to get back to Julian Rocks next year and dive. Hopefully there's no floods or anything like that, because when we went, it was probably about a week or two after some of the floods. Yeah. And so the water was quite murky, so the images probably weren't as crystal clear as they could have been. So I'm really keen to get back to there. And I think from a landscape perspective, there's probably too many to count. Like in terms of moments, I think the first moment that actually comes to mind is, and it bounces back to what we were talking about in terms of dynamic range. It was, I'd bought the D850, and the first place I took the camera to was the stairs that are synonymous with my name in Adelaide. And I was so excited because the sun dipped below the horizon, and it was a very dull sunset. And I was like, damn, my first outing with this camera, and it's a dud sunset. And I was just sitting there watching it, and then all of a sudden it just started to glow.
Yeah. And
it was just glowing. And I was like, I got all excited that when I had finished taking all my photos and I'd gotten home that night, I was like, yes, I've got like magic. I've got magic. I know I have. But I looked at the photos again, and I'd underexposed the images by like probably 3 stops.
Oh, wow.
Maybe like the images, apart from the horizon that was just glowing.
Yeah.
Everything else was like almost black. And I was like, I just was like.
And if you bring the shadows up, you've just got noise.
Well, no, the photo's perfect.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I'll have to send it to you after this. I know, like, for people that are listening, visually it's not going to help them, but it would, like, I was blown away because the camera just captured so much dynamic range. It was able to bring it all out, and there was not a great deal of noise. I think for posting online for Facebook and Instagram anyway, it was fine. But I'll go find it and I'll send it back. I'll send you both, and you'll see. But that was probably one of my most memorable landscape moments. But just because it's me just being excited, because I get very excited when the light, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, is my thing is chasing the light. So when the light is incredible, what's really good, I get goosebumps and I get excited, and I sort of lose my thought process. And so photography, I find, and I don't know about yourself, and like, how long have you been shooting for?
I can't remember.
Okay. So because people always say, they're like, how do you capture the images that you're doing, or how do you capture moments? And maybe you're exactly the same, so correct me if I'm wrong, but for me, it's second thought most of the time.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of thought that goes in. It's just, my fingers flick on the dials and then I'm like, bam, here we go. And I think it's just because I'm
thinking more of the composition and getting excited by the light that I'm seeing, but I'm thinking more, okay, do I with the zoom lens, do I crop in a little bit? Do I pull back? What do I do there? Do I tilt left or right or up or down? And, they're the main things. But once I've actually settled, that's the compo on. Yeah, I don't think much about the shooting other than, going up and down the aperture scale maybe a little bit to give me what I want. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm exactly the same. Like, I'll focus on what I want the image to look like in terms of like a composition, but settings wise, there's not a lot of thought that happens. But when the light is really nice, I lose that. It's like I get this like I can't think of another phrase to use, but baby brain. Which I'm a man, I can't get baby brain. But a girl at work's pregnant. She's talking about a baby brain today, and I was like, that's probably what it is. I actually forget what I'm doing, and so I'll come away with these images, and I'll be like, oh, what was I doing? Or I'll see them on the back of the screen afterwards. And I'm like, what was I doing? Like, what was I thinking? And that's where luckily the D850 was powerful enough in those few instances where, because that wasn't the only time that I got excited and just underexposed images, that I'd luckily be able to bring them back. But yeah.
Nice.
I sound rather silly, but
no, I'm totally with you.
Yeah. So that's I'm a little bit worried because, as I've mentioned a few times, off to New Zealand in 30 something days, and everyone's like, I can't wait to see what you come away with in New Zealand. And I'm actually
expectation bar's been set high.
It's high, but I'm freaking out because I'm like, I know that I'm going to see something and I'm going to be absolutely blown away by the beauty of the scene. And I don't know if you've ever been to New Zealand, have you? Or?
I have, but only for work and only to the North Island.
Okay.
I haven't been to the South Island at all, I regret to say.
Yeah, hopefully there's still time. Now the borders are open. And I just know I'm going to see something and I'm just going to be like blown away, and I'm going to come away with like, sure, I'll come away with images because I'll calm myself down. But I think the first day or two, I'm just going to be like, oh, wow.
But I think, to be honest, this is one thing that a lot of photographers sometimes forget to do, is to actually sit there and enjoy that moment for what it is, as opposed to sitting there concentrating on trying to get the setting right and all the rest of that sort of thing. Yeah, great if you can manage both, but some of my favourite moments are ones where I haven't even got the camera out of the bag.
Yeah.
And it's just sitting there watching the sunrise, sitting next to my wife, or watching the sunset,
Or even like tonight, just ducking outside and watching
duck outside and have a look at the moon. I'm not going to take a camera out there and try and shoot the moon tonight.
Yeah. My laptop, because I logged into Instagram to get ready for this. So like it's now sending me notifications every now and again. And literally I've had probably 3 or 4 in the last 10 minutes being like, you better be taking photos of this. And I'm like,
no,
I'll reply later. I'll probably will duck outside and take some photos afterwards, but I think I'll probably like similar to you. I'll just go out and just enjoy it. Like I said earlier, it's the moon. It doesn't really fit with what I share, and like there's nothing. It's just literally just going to be the moon in the sky.
Well, this is it. It's too high for it to be, set against anything interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, it's kind of like there'll be a lot of other people taking shots of it, so I don't need to.
Yeah. That's it. Because I know it'll be all over like Facebook and Instagram
Yeah,
tonight, tomorrow. The news pages will share it all and be like, oh yeah, cool.
that's exactly it. Um, I don't want to. I mean, I want to let you get out and do what you want to do with the moon, but I guess what do you like to do when you're not out shooting?
Um, I, I'm a big on learning. So there's two things that are very important for me. One is the gym. So I spend a fair bit of time at the gym. I may end up going for a second time tonight because I sort of cut my session earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So physical fitness and health and fitness is very important to me.
Yep.
And the second one is learning. I'm very big on continuously learning, and not necessarily always photography related. I read books on all different sorts of subjects, or I watch YouTube documentaries or documentaries just about random things that
Yep.
just nothing to do with anything photography related. Like before jumping on with you, I was actually watching a YouTube documentary about Papa John's,
Oh
the
yeah.
story of Papa John's in America and how they started, like the guy that founded it, and then all the stuff behind how that began, and then how it got to where it's at, and then the problems that they face and stuff like that. Just random stuff that like I just love to just watch random videos like that and just learn different things that random bits at points in time I may just bring into conversation with people and go, oh, okay, that's all right. But if I'm not shooting, I'm probably also thinking about photography. It consumes me in that sense that it's a big part of my life. Like it's a huge part of my life. Oops.
I think everyone that is a serious, and whether you get paid to do it or whether you're full time or part time, but people that are serious about it, I think have to have that little bit of OCD-ness about them. That
yeah,
the brain just gets channeled, and I've got to do this. I've got to go out at sunrise, and I've got to go and stand in the water and up to my knees or up to my neck or whatever and get the shot.
Yeah, and it's like you're right. Like the OCD is probably a big thing. Like probably the right way of describing it, because definitely that's probably it is. It really is. And one of the things that I've been focusing on a lot over the last probably 3 months, trying to get myself better is because this year I started teaching for Nikon, like teaching live classes. And when I first started to where I'm at now, like trying to teach people that might have different learning styles to myself, whether they're audio or visual, and trying to make sure that, these people that are paying to come to classes and learn how to capture images or improve or feel better with their camera. So I've been watching a lot of content on learning styles and how to teach people different things.
Yeah, right.
Which has been a pretty big learning curve. I've still got a lot to learn.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying it. I really do enjoy getting out and just getting hands-on with people. And
no, that's fantastic. Have you ever hit a creative wall? And if so, how did you handle
it? I've definitely hit a lot of creative walls over the years. And for me, in terms of handling those early on, I got really frustrated with myself, and I'd beat myself up that I just didn't really have that desire to go out and create or capture images. And I'd go for these drives, long drives, whether it's down south or even just to some of the local beaches in Adelaide, or a few times I've driven to like the York Peninsula, which is 4 hours away, and I'd take all the camera gear, but I just wouldn't shoot. And I'd beat myself up because I was like, well, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why am I still driving out? Why can't I take photos? Why I said no desire to do it? And as like I've grown as a person, I've realized that during those periods of time where I've hit that creative wall, it's just to accept it.
Yep.
And not beat myself up, and then pivot into something else, like find something else to do. Or like you mentioned before, still go out, but don't take the camera and just go and appreciate the moments that they are, and just sit there, read, meditate, just not be too concerned. Whereas like probably 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I would really beat myself up. I'd feel down. So then I'd feel worse.
Yep.
And I'd fall deeper and deeper into that rut. And getting out just took a long time. I'm curious to know about yourself though. Like what do you do, or if you found yourself in them?
Oh, well, I started a podcast.
Yeah.
That's one way that I dealt with the creative wall. But that was more a wall that was imposed on me because that was middle of COVID, lockdowns, 165 days where I wasn't allowed more than 5Ks away from the front door. But other creative walls, yeah. I tend to do similar sorts of things in terms of just going out and enjoying an experience, but I'll just go and do something else for a little while if I feel that I'm in a bit of a rut or things aren't working the way that I want them to. And sometimes that may be completely and utterly divorced from anything to do with photography. Sometimes I'll also, do something different with photography. So just pick up the camera and do something in a different genre, or play around with it in a different way and do something a bit more experimental that, I may or may never share with anyone else other than people that I think might appreciate it. It depends on how I feel about it at the end. But yeah, it's not something that I got to say, it hasn't happened a lot, but it's something that I'm very conscious of looking at strategies for, avoiding it in the first place. And one of the things that I've done in terms of that for my own mental well-being is actually getting a lot more relaxed about what happens on social media and getting a lot more relaxed about whether or not there are or aren't likes or whatever. Those things can consume you a little bit, and they can therefore impact what you're doing with your photography. And if I don't have a post every night, I don't care. I will when I can, and I won't when I don't.
Yeah. And that's really important. And
yeah,
especially because the whole social media side of it is great, because you want to share these images that you love. And then you go and you post them, and then you're like, yes, it's really amazing. And then you come back and it's like, hold on, 2 people like this, or whatever it is.
And whether it's the algorithm or people just don't jive with what you've put up, it shouldn't matter. And, people put too much stock in it, I think, and it's really just about, if I think about it and think about the people that do comment and I see regularly, they're the ones that are obviously, I don't want to say fans, because I don't think I've necessarily got fans. Maybe there might be some fans coming off the back of the podcast now, but to be honest, it's not something that I think too much about, but I do appreciate those that are there. And if you do comment, I'll always comment back as much as I possibly can.
And it's really important, because a lot of people get so stuck in that whole, like, they'll get upset. I've known friends in Adelaide that have almost deleted their accounts because they get depressed because they're not getting the engagement that they get. And, Instagram removing the likes for a period of time was really good, because that kind of helped. They then obviously allowed it to come back, and so you can see some people's likes, and other times, or you can hide them if you want. But I think it's more about just sharing what you like. And one of the questions I get a lot when people reach out to me and stuff is, how do I get more likes? How do I get more followers? Yeah. And my response is always the same. It's, don't worry about the number of likes. Don't worry about the followers. Like, why do you want
what you enjoy sharing?
Yeah. Why? Why do you want this? And they'll be like, well, because I want to work with brands, or I want to be like famous.
I want to be an influencer.
Yeah, I want to be an influencer. Like, but it's not important. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Like,
that's exactly it. Yeah.
I know people that have under 1,000 followers, but they get offered to shoot like cars for Peugeot and Ford and all these brands.
Yep.
And I know people that have 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. They get nothing.
Yeah.
And it's because the brands, they see the content. Like your content may not always reach the right person, but if it reaches the right person and they look at your style and they go,
I want to work with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to work with you. They're going to go, oh, wow. They're not going to go, oh, you've only got 500 followers. Like you're not good enough. Because it's the content is what's important, and sharing what you love, what you like, and then that will come across. That people will feel that in your images, and then the rest might come. It may not come, but that shouldn't like get you upset, or get you down. And
it shouldn't dictate your life. And social media, if it's a big part of your life, I get it. If you were, let's say you were somebody with, 40, 50,000 followers and it was your business and you are an influencer for whatever, brands or whatever that may entail, then great. I can understand why you might be really looking hard at your engagement. But if you're just a hobby or amateur or even a professional photographer that is just enjoying sharing your work, well, just do it and don't worry too much about the rest of it.
Oh, that's it. And I'm guilty of it myself. Like when probably mid last year, before that, my account was off the hook. I was getting thousands of likes on images. I was getting hundreds of comments, and I was like, wow, like my account was growing massively. And the last year and a half, it's like just dropped off. Sometimes I might post and I might get 200 likes.
Yep.
I look at it because I'm just curious, but I don't get upset anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas a year ago or a year ago, or even before that, when it was good, but then I'd post something and it wouldn't go great, I would probably fall back into that rut a little bit. And I'd be like, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
Whereas now I'm like, well, cool, whatever. Like it doesn't matter. I'm sharing content that I love, and sometimes I post.
The people that like you will seek you out and find you and like your stuff.
Yeah.
The ones, I mean, a big part of it, particularly with Instagram at the moment, is the way that they are feeding you everyone that you don't follow. That's certainly not helped anyone as far as I'm concerned, but there are ways of actually seeing a feed which is your followers and people that you follow, and that's the way that I engage with it now, and I rarely use the standard feed. I'll tell you another little secret, and they'll probably shut it down after they hear this. Not that I think they're listening. But if you look at the desktop version of Instagram as opposed to the app, you get a feed of your followers and get a lot less ads. I won't say you get none.
Yeah.
You get a lot. I've certainly noticed that I get half the ads, half the sponsored posts that I do and I can literally sit there and scroll, open both at exactly the same time, and the post feeds are completely different.
Yeah, because I don't know if you've noticed that. I've only noticed this probably the last 2 days. If I click on someone's profile and I start scrolling, instead of looking at their feed like as a grid, if I go through their post and scroll through their post, I now get sponsored posts.
That's it.
And I'm like, hold on, I've clicked on, and so I go, do I not click on their profile? Because I'm like, who's this name? And I'm like, hold on, sponsored. I'm like, go back and I'm on their profile. Why is Instagram showing me a sponsored post when I'm on someone's, like I'm trying to scroll through someone's profile? I'm like, that's really cheeky. But
you don't see, interestingly, you don't see that in the desktop version.
Yeah, okay.
At least as of when this was recorded.
Yeah. I know you said like they're not listening, but they're always listening.
Yeah, well, I've got my phone here in front of me, so
yeah, mine's too.
The AI bot is taking notes.
Yeah, hold on, let me just refresh the Instagram webpage.
That's right. Are there any photographers out there that you think I should be talking to?
I think one, Josh Beams.
I
I don't know
haven't
if you,
spoken to Josh. I'm aware of his work. Yes.
yeah, Josh is a really incredible photographer. I remember a few years ago watching him. He came to Adelaide with Nikon, and I went to his, like, I sat in with his thing, and I was just blown away at just the way that he talks and his thought process behind the
Yep.
images. So Josh is really incredible. If I think about some South Australian photographers, there's a photographer called Troy Story.
Okay.
I'll send you his profile afterwards.
Yeah.
He is so he's not a landscape photographer, but he does do some landscape, but he has a totally different way of seeing the world, and his landscape photos that he does take are just out of this world. You've done Marissa.
Yep.
I love Marissa stuff. Have you done I think it's Bridget?
No.
She's a Gold Coast based photographer. She's really incredible with her sunrises, and
I know Bridget. Yep.
I know I'm just naming off Nikon photographers here as well. So I know we usually cop a bit of slack in the community because everyone says our cameras are like potatoes, but I don't know, what brand do you shoot with?
Me, I'm a Canon.
Okay.
It's basically interestingly, I had a Nikon point and shoot, and at some time a couple of Canon point and shoots, and this was back in the day when they first sort of came out, and I hadn't got I was still using a film SLR. I hadn't bought a DSLR at the time, and I just found the color on the Canons looked a lot better than it did on the Nikon that I had.
Yeah.
And it might have just been that particular model or that particular sensor or whatever, I don't know. But then when I did a little bit of playing around and shopping around, and I found, I won't say the same, but similar sort of color differences. That the color in the Nikons weren't quite as vibrant as they were. The blues weren't quite as vibrant as they were in the Canon, and yeah, so that was why I picked them back in the day, years and years ago, 2002 or three or whenever it was, I think.
Just a little while ago now.
A little while ago now. It's hard to believe that's 20 years ago.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you mentioned about the color, because and I guess maybe that's why I've stuck to Nikon over the years, is I love their colors.
Yeah, and it's a preference. I know.
Yeah. And it's like when I know when I've told people that, oh, like, what do you love about like your Nikon cameras? I'm like, the colors of the images that it comes out. They sort of look at you like, aren't they all the same? It's like, no, they're not.
They're not.
Because even Sony have, I feel Sony
I
have
think
a lot cooler.
yeah. So I've got to say I'm not a fan of Sony's color. It's to me, it's just not as good as either Nikon or Canon or Fuji.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I'm not really a gear snob. I would shoot anything if I had it, but now I've got a whole bunch of Canon glass. I can't see myself changing. I'm coming up for that choice around mirrorless and what I jump to there. Do I ditch all the glass? But then I also think economically, well, for $200, I can also attach all of the nice L glass that I've got from Canon to their mirrorless. So I'll probably do that.
Yeah. And I don't know enough about, like, I'm probably similar to yourself, I'm not a gear snob. I'll shoot with anything. I can't work a Canon camera at all. Like, someone gives me a Canon, I'm like, what am I doing?
I'm the same. I'm a bit the same with Nikon and Sony. Sony, I think, has got a much worse interface than either Nikon. Nikon's a little bit more intuitive.
Yeah. See, I'm better with Sony, but that's only because my best mate has like a Sony. So when we go out and shoot, like, I might shoot him with his camera. But the adapted lenses, I found I've got one old Nikon lens now, or Sigma lens actually, and like adapted, it works perfectly. So I imagine Canon would be the same. That like adapted would be.
A mate of mine, he's just shifted to. He does a lot of motorsport photography. He's just shifted to the R3. And I think he also has an R5, which are sort of like your two top of the range. The R3 is really aimed at sport shoot. I mean, yes, you could shoot anything you want with it, but when you're talking about the ability to do something like, what is it, 60 or 70 frames a second on electronic shutter,
Yeah.
it's really all about being able to do sports photography more than anything. And the R5 is more attuned to a general workhorse across the board. It'll pretty much do anything, except it won't perform quite as well as the R3. But he's done the same in terms of the adapter. He bought the $200 adapter, and his old glass works just as well as the new glass. Some of the new glass has a couple of extra features because you've got because you've got in body and in lens stabilization. In the R series, they work together to give you a much better image. So with the older lenses, even though they might have image stabilization on the camera, it just doesn't work quite as well. This is his sort of opinion to as he's related it to me. But I've got one more question for you, and you probably know what's coming. It's the most important question I can ask. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Love it. It definitely belongs on pizza.
Very good. So you're one that'll order the Hawaiian, yeah?
Yeah, I just offering a little bit of a tangent. One of my best mates owns a pizza shop.
All right.
And he doesn't think pineapple belongs on pizza. So I'll go in there and order.
He might be Italian, so he's probably got good reason.
No, he's Lebanese.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he hates pineapple on pizza. So sometimes I'll just walk in there and I'll be like, hey, can I grab this pizza? And it doesn't have pineapple. I'll be like, but can I get pineapple? Yeah. Or I'll be like, can I just get a cheese and pineapple pizza just to like razz him up? But I think it definitely belongs on even burgers. Burgers the other one. People
it's got to be on a burger. Definitely.
Yeah, it's got to be on a burger as well. I don't know. I know why people hate it.
Yeah, no, I'm all about it on a burger. I'm less fussy if it's not on a pizza. I'll eat it. If it's on a pizza and there's nothing else, I'll eat it. I probably wouldn't go and order it though.
Yeah, like just cheese and pineapple pizza.
Yeah, no, that I probably wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, I've never done it, but I'd go in there to order it. Like he'll also like I'll get kebabs from him and like different things. I'm like, oh, can you just chuck some pineapple on that for me?
Actually, pineapple on a kebab would be great, I think.
I didn't like it.
No?
So I got one and I didn't like it. And so when I went back there, he was like, all right, how'd the pineapple on the kebab go? And I was like, no, it's not good. He's like, yeah, no, just take it off your pizza next time.
I might have to give it a go.
Yeah, let me know, like different taste buds, you know?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right. It's been absolutely wonderful chatting with you, Nathan, and really good getting to know you a lot better. Where can people find your work?
So the easiest place to find me is probably on Instagram, which is just at Nathan Godwin. I do use Facebook, but not as much. But that's Nathan Godwin Photography. But Instagram is probably where I'm on the most.
Perfect. All right. Thanks very much, Matt.
No, thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com. I'm also on Vero, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne and hope to see you out shooting soon.